Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Indie Pop Girl, the podcast for music chat, new releases, hidden gems, and nostalgic deep dives. Happy New Year! I am back and it's time to deliver my favourite albums of 2025. These are the albums that I simply couldn't get enough of throughout the year, and the ones which took me completely by surprise. Last week, I dropped my top songs of 2025, and dropping this episode today will wrap things up nicely before we head into 2026 when the new releases start to drop. I hope you all had a restful and enjoyable Christmas and holiday season. Like I mentioned last week in my Top Songs of the Year episode, it's been very interesting reading all of the best of 2025 lists with the publications and music reactors on YouTube. It's my favourite time of the year as I love to find out what other people have been listening to, and in years gone by, it has introduced me to so many new artists and incredible records to discover. It's been such an incredible year for music, and narrowing it down to just 10 albums was honestly so tough. I've gone back and forth so many times, but I think I've finally landed on a list that feels right to me. There isn't a ranking as such. All of these records I love so much, and trying to rank them would be such an impossible task. Of course, there will be some records that I have spent more time with than others, but doesn't mean I love them any less. I am so excited to share my favourite albums with you. Some of these records I have already talked about in previous episodes, and some I haven't even mentioned at all, especially if they were released before I started my podcast or something that I have discovered way after the release date. It's been a huge challenge, but a fun one at the same time. And if something takes your fancy in my list, I would appreciate if you could listen to my review, of course if there is one available. And with the records I don't have a review for, it's going to be so much fun talking about something completely new. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, I will not be playing clips of any songs, so if you are curious then please support the artists I cover by streaming, downloading or buying physical copies. Thank you. Before I dive into my top 10 albums, just a little disclaimer. Please don't be offended if your favourite albums aren't in my list. There was so much music released over the year, and it's difficult keeping up with everything. That being said, there are still some songs and albums that are still on my list that I haven't even got round to yet, and will most definitely roll over into 2026. So please don't get upset. This is just a bit of fun at the end of the year. And at the end of the day, it's nothing serious and everyone's list is going to be different. But it would be so awesome to hear from my listeners, and I would love to find out what you have been listening to this year. So please let me know what your favourite songs and albums are. And who knows, I might find a new discovery along the way. So let's kick off the list with number 10, Let All That We Imagine Be the Light by Garbage. This one might feel familiar if you've been listening right from the start, because it was actually the album I talked about in my very first episode, which feels kind of fitting now that I'm looking back at the year as a whole. I did really enjoy this record when it came out. I played it a lot on release day and in the weeks after, and at the time it felt like a really solid, confident Garbage album, one that knew exactly what it was doing. I remember saying in that first episode that Sisyphus was the standout track for me, and that definitely hasn't changed. It even ended up in my honourable mentions for Songs of the Year, which tells you how much that track stuck with me. That said, the reason it lands at number 10 rather than higher is mostly about longevity. I was really into it at the start of its release, but as the year went on, I found myself going back to it less and less. Not because it's a bad album, far from it, but just because other records ended up taking up more space for me as the months passed. So this feels like a fair placing. It had its moment, it made an impression, and I still think it's a strong addition to their catalogue. It just didn't quite stay with me in the same way some of the other albums higher up this list did. Next at number 9, Willoughby Tucker, I'll Always Love You by Ethel Cain. This is another album I've already talked about on the podcast, this time in a bonus episode, so I won't go over everything again, but it definitely deserved a place in this list. When I reviewed it, I said that Fuck Me Eyes was the standout track, and that song also ended up featuring in my Top Songs of the Year episode. It's one of those tracks that really lingers, and it sums up a lot of what this record does so well. This is an album that demands patience. It's not an easy listen, and the subject matter is heavy, emotionally, thematically, sometimes even physically exhausting, and because of that, it's a really difficult record to rank. It's not something I just throw on casually or dip into for one song. It's very much an entire experience for me, and I've found I savour it most when I sit with the record properly, especially listening on vinyl start to finish. Putting it at number 9 feels fair, not because it isn't powerful, it absolutely is, but because it's a record I return to in very specific moments, rather than one that soundtracked large chunks of my year. I'm also really surprised by how many people and publications have completely missed this album out of their end of year lists. That said, music is subjective, and I completely understand that Ethel Cain isn't for everyone. This is challenging, uncomfortable at times, and emotionally intense music. But for those willing to give it the time and space it asks for, it is incredibly rewarding. Next album at number 8 in my list is Happiness Is Going to Get You by Ali X. This is one I actually haven't reviewed on the podcast yet, partly because it only came out in November. That said, I have been playing it a lot, both at work and on vinyl, and it's quickly proved itself to be another really solid release from her. I think this album hasn't quite got the love it deserves, and that's a big reason why I wanted to include it here. It might not be as immediate as Girl with No Face, but the songwriting on this record is incredibly strong, and vocally she sounds fantastic throughout. It's one of those albums that quietly grows on you the more time you give it, rather than trying to grab you instantly. We were also just so blessed to get a follow-up so quickly, which still feels kind of unreal, and at this point Ali X has become one of my favourite artists. She ended up being my most played artist on Spotify Wrapped this year, which honestly doesn't surprise me at all. I was also really lucky to see her at Rough Trade in Liverpool for the album launch, and I actually got the chance to meet her, which I still can't quite believe. She was so sweet, and it's one of those moments that just makes you love an artist even more. And finally, if you're going to see Magdalena Bay in Manchester or Birmingham next month, Ali X is supporting, and we'll see you down at the front. Next in my list at number 7, that's Showbiz Baby by Jade. This is another record I haven't reviewed on the podcast yet, and I'll be honest, I was really late to the Jade party, but after hearing this record, I am fully on board the Jade train now. When I finally sat down and gave this album a proper listen, it didn't immediately blow me away. It was very much a slow burner, but it's one of those records that just kept pulling me back in. The more time I spent with it, the more it revealed itself, and that's something I really value in a pop album. What really took me by surprise was just how cohesive it feels and how high the quality is across the entire record. You can absolutely hear the care, love and time that Jade has put into this project. It never feels rushed or thrown together, and that attention to detail really shows. For a pop record, it's full of substance. The production is varied and interesting, moving through different styles without ever feeling messy. And it does a brilliant job of showcasing Jade's impressive vocals throughout. She sounds confident, playful, emotional, sometimes all within the same song. There are so many standout moments on this album. Angel of My Dreams is an obvious highlight, and Plastic Box is another one I keep coming back to and featured in my own song list. And honestly, I can completely understand why this album has featured on so heavily on so many end of year lists. It really earns that recognition. Next on my list at number 6, Eusexia by FKA Twigs. This is a release from way back in January, so I didn't cover it on the podcast at the time, mainly because the podcast didn't actually start until June. But honestly, I still find it hard to believe that this album is nearly a year old now. I've played this record so much over the course of the year. It sounds absolutely incredible on vinyl. And it was such a refreshing thing to have during January, when everything can feel particularly bleak. It brought something immersive and alive into a very great time of the year, and I kept returning to it again and again. Tracks like Girl Feels Good, Perfect Stranger, Drums of Death and the title track are so addictive, and you find things to appreciate on repeated listens. With Twigs, the production is always off the scale. Her vocals are always off the scale, and her visuals are always off the scale, and Eusexia is no exception. Everything feels intentional, carefully crafted, and pushed just that bit further than you expect. For me, she is genuinely one of the best British artists out there. She always surprises me. She keeps things fresh and she never repeats herself. Each project feels like its own world, and this album is no different. I have so much respect for Twigs as an artist, for her willingness to keep pushing boundaries, to keep evolving, and to trust her instincts. I'm always excited to see what she does next, because whatever it is, it's never predictable and it's always worth the wait. Now we've hit the top 5 in my albums of the year list, and placed at number 5 is Addison by Addison Rae. This is an album I reviewed back in my June recap episode, and honestly, it's a record that completely took me by surprise. I really wasn't expecting a pop album to have this much replay value, but here we are, and Addison proved me very wrong, and I love that. Like Jade, Addison is absolutely serving and delivering when it comes to quality. The standard across this record is so high, and that doesn't feel accidental at all. Her team of collaborators, all made up of women, is genuinely so impressive, and I have the deepest respect for that. You can tell there's a shared vision and real intention behind this project. That vision is so clear on this debut. Addison knows exactly what she wants to say, how she wants to sound, and how she wants to present herself, and it shows. Yes, some of the tracks could probably benefit from being a bit longer instead of leaning into those TikTok length runtimes, but honestly, it still works for me. These songs work perfectly dropped into a playlist, but they also really hold up as a full album experience. And I didn't think I'd be returning to this record anywhere near as often as I have throughout the year. Yet here we are. There are so many highlights. Diet Pepsi, Aquamarine, Fame is a Gun, Summer Forever. I could just keep going. And I completely understand why this album has featured on so many end of year lists. For a pop record, you really can't deny the level of quality on display here. If pop albums are sounding like this, then I'm more than happy to give them all the praise because Addison really did that in 2025. Coming up next, in the number 4 place, Virgin by Lorde. This is a record I've already reviewed and discussed at length on the podcast, but as I mentioned last week in my Top Songs of the Year episode, that the Virgin review is honestly one of the episodes I'm most proud of. Being able to pick apart and dissect a record like this and to do it in such a short space of time was a real challenge. But I pushed myself further than I had before, and moments like that are exactly why I love music so much. To experience this release in real time and then get to respond to it thoughtfully on my own podcast felt like such a reward. Virgin is a pop record that's so complex, so challenging. It's raw, blunt, and completely direct. And getting the opportunity to really talk about that, to sit with it and unpack it, was incredibly special. It's also a record I'm still returning to all these months later, and it hasn't lost any of its power or magic. It still continues to blow me away, and the impressive production just gets better and better. I still don't fully understand why this album didn't connect with the general public in a bigger way. But at the same time, I have so much respect for Lorde for staying completely true to her art, for not watering anything down for numbers or sales. I honestly don't think she cares about that. And why should she? This feels like an artist choosing to express herself exactly how she needs to, in a way that's authentic and real. There was something about Virgin that I connected with immediately. It grabbed me straight away, emotionally, and it hasn't really let go since. I honestly think this is one of those pop albums that will become a cult favourite over time. Something people will come back to and eventually connect with more deeply. I had a feeling that it was going to be a strong release, and despite the explicit nature of the visuals and the artwork, I wasn't prepared for just how deep the emotional connection would be. And that, for me, is what makes this album so special. So, guys, we are now in the top three, and the album, which is in the number 3 position, is The Clearing by Wolf Alice. This is another record I've already reviewed on the podcast, and honestly, that episode was an absolute joy to put together. This record was going back and forth between the number 2 and number 3 spot for ages, and I'll explain my final reasoning when I get to number 2. But regardless of placement, The Clearing is a really special record for me. This year with Wolf Alice has been incredible. From seeing them so close at the front at Camp and Furnace in Liverpool back in September, to then seeing them in a full arena setting in December, that contrast alone felt like such a full circle moment. It really drove home just how far they've come. Wolf Alice are truly at the top of their game right now, and paired with Greg Kurstin's production, The Clearing is a huge statement of confidence in their songwriting and musicianship. I'll be honest, when I first heard Greg was producing the record, I was a little concerned. I wasn't sure how it was going to pan out, but now, this is one of my favourite records of the year in terms of production and engineering. It sounds incredible. The songs really get under your skin. Even though the band is showing a more mature, softer side here, the strength of the songwriting never dips. If anything, it hits harder emotionally. I cried a lot during my first vinyl listen on release day. Not just because of the music itself, but because I felt so proud to be a fan. Proud of how much they've grown, matured and evolved. Thorns, Play It Out, A Midnight Song hit me like a truck, but they still can go hard with Bloom Baby Bloom. And honestly, why should they keep doing the same thing? Bands are allowed to explore, to experiment, to move forward. The Clearing gives Wolf Alice that space, and they absolutely thrive in it. And Ellie? Honestly, Ellie Rousel is my queen. I love her so much. She's so down to earth and humble. You can imagine her down the pub or just popping into Greg's. But then she steps on stage and absolutely rips it up. Vocally, she has never sounded better in my opinion. And she looks so comfortable now as the front woman of what I believe is the best British band out there right now. So the album I've picked in the number 2 spot is an album which completely blew me away on the first listen, and that is Something Beautiful by Miley Cyrus. This is a record I reviewed alongside Garbage in my very first podcast episode, and honestly, I was a bag of nerves. I nearly didn't review this album at all, but I'm so glad that I did, because it ended up being one of the most important listening experiences of the year for me. I've placed this at number 2 for a very specific reason. The Clearing was actually sitting in this spot at one point, and picking Wolf Alice here probably would have been the predictable choice. But in the end, I went with the record that completely floored me with no expectations from an artist I didn't really connect with at all before. I honestly had no idea that Miley Cyrus was capable of delivering a record like this. That first listen is something I'll never forget. I sat down with my notebook at the same time, ready to make notes. And within minutes, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was absolutely stunned. The level of experimentation, the ambition, and the sheer confidence of it all, it was breathtaking. I've already mentioned the level of experimentation on this record, and the production from Sean Everett and Jonathan Rado is on another level entirely. For a pop record to sound this daring, this bold, this fearless, has my absolute fucking respect. And Miley refuses to play it safe. I'll be honest, I didn't really respect Miley as an artist before this record. But Something Beautiful completely changed that for me. I now see her as a true visionary. This feels like an artist taking a massive creative leap, and this album feels like a real statement of intent. It's such a shame that the general public, and even a lot of the critics, just didn't get this record at all. But honestly, it's their loss. And in a strange way, that disconnect has only solidified its place here at number 2 for me. This is a true album experience. It's more than just a pop record. It pulls in elements of prog, rock, indie, trip hop, dance, folk. It has everything you could want in a record if you love music that takes risks. And vocally, well, Miley is absolutely off the scale. I will always champion this album. It blew me away, and it continues to blow me away. This is what pop music should do. To be moved in this way by a pop record is something really special. It's something beautiful. Thank you, Miley, for delivering the pop moment of 2025. So guys, we have finally reached the top spot. My number 1, my top album of 2025 is Sable Fable by Bon Iver. I always knew this was going to end up at the top. This is a record I reviewed during a really difficult period. I was exhausted, emotional, and I honestly had no idea how I was going to shape the episode. I had complete writer's block. The only thing I knew for certain was how deeply this record was shaping that moment in my life and how it would go on to shape the rest of the year. This felt like the album that was waiting for me to discover it, to experience it at exactly the right time. And somehow it gave me the strength and the muse to keep going with my podcast when I really didn't know if I had it in me to carry on. Records as powerful don't come along very often. And because of how I was feeling at the time, I was fully able to connect to it, to immerse myself completely in the world of this project. I know this might sound dramatic, but it isn't. You can never deny the power of music. and this record genuinely healed me. I found so much comfort in these songs. I let myself get lost in their messages, and eventually the emotion just poured out during my review. I actually considered cutting that part out of the episode, but I'm so glad I didn't looking back. I want my discussions to stay authentic, whether I'm feeling happy or sad, or somewhere in between. Despite the sadness and what I was going through personally, this album also gave me a lot of joy. It gave me the confidence and my voice to carry on with my podcast, as I was starting to feel doubts or whether it was the right decision or was I even good at doing it. This record has just given me so much this year, and I had to place it right at the top of the pack. I am also so grateful for the moment that started it all. Opening Reddit on that day and seeing someone on the War on Drugs thread post a video for There's a Rhythm. That moment was so life-changing for me. I hope I'm making sense here, because it's hard to fully put into words why this album means so much to me. But Sable Fable helped me find the hope and beauty during an intense, dark period in my life, and for that I will be forever grateful. If you are out there and struggling right now and are looking for some comfort, I really recommend this record. And to know that these bad times don't last for long, and things will get better. On the strength of this record, I've become a fan for life, and Sable Fable will always be a special record, not just of 2025, but for the rest of my life. So that's my top 10 albums of the year. A loose ranking, but one that really reflects where I've been emotionally and creatively over the past 12 months. Some of these records challenged me, some surprised me, some comforted me, and some completely changed the way I listen to music this year. Getting to talk about some of them on this podcast has honestly been such a privilege, and I'm so grateful to everyone who's listened, shared, or even just quietly tuned in. Music continues to be the thing that grounds me, pushes me, and helps me make sense of everything. And if even one of these albums connects with you in the way they did with me, then that feels pretty special. But before I go, here are a few more records that are worthy of a mention in my honourable mentions. I'm not going to go into loads of detail here with these, but the fact that I'm mentioning them here is more than enough. First is Juniper by Joy Crookes. Joy's second album is warm, soulful, and so smooth and cool. It's one of those records that just wraps around you. Next is Euro Country by CMAT. I've recently got round to listening to this and I found it very enjoyable, and I will be going back to this in the new year. Next is Man's Best Friend by Sabrina Carpenter. I was probably a little harsh on my review, which was based off a few listens. After a few months now, it still isn't perfect, but there is still a lot to enjoy on this record. Man-Child, Tears, Sugar Talking and House Tour are songs which are still in rotation for me. Next is Lux by Rosalia. I know this record is super popular with the critics and the fans, and I have listened to this record all the way through, but I still kind of need a few more listens to fully make up my mind on the record. But I still wanted to give it a mention as I will be returning to it in 2026. There is some beautiful arrangements, vocals and production to admire on this record. Next is West End Girl by Lily Allen. Honest, bold, sharp, confessional. What more do you want? Next is Licorice by Hatchie. It doesn't quite live up to her Giving the World Away record, but still excels in shimmering dream pop, and it gets better with each listen. Next is For Melancholy Brunettes and Sad Women by Japanese Breakfast. This was slightly disappointing for me coming off the masterpiece that is Jubilee, but it is still a solid release and I wanted to mention it here. I just wanted a bit more from Michelle. I feel that some of the songs are a bit half-baked, but if you are looking for something chill and you've not heard this yet, I do recommend it, and I recommend Japanese Breakfast if you love all things indie. Next is Perverts by Ethel Cain. Challenging, uncomfortable and uncompromising. Not an easy listen at all, but Ethel gave us 2 projects in 2025 and I feel this project needs to be mentioned here. Next is Hurry Up Tomorrow by The Weeknd. I found this quite a struggle to get through at first due to the number of tracks, but there is still plenty to appreciate here. It's atmospheric and polished with Abel's signature vocals, and I enjoyed a lot from this record. And to finish things off, we've got The Art of Loving by Olivia Dean. I finally got round to listening to this at work before Christmas and I really enjoyed it. I love her vocals and she's got such a smooth, chill vibe. I will be returning to this project in 2026, and if you love Joy Crookes as well, then I'm sure you will dig this record too. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Please follow me on Instagram, Facebook and Threads at The Indie Pop Girl. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could follow and share, as it helps other music lovers to find the show. I'm also on YouTube. You can find me at the Indie Pop Girl Podcast, and I'd be grateful if you could like and subscribe, as I'm creating content, shorts and posting teasers for upcoming episodes. You can also find me on TikTok at the Indie Pop Girl Podcast if you want to give me a follow over there. There is a Spotify playlist available of my top songs of the year, and I've added all of my favourite tracks mentioned in that episode, including the honourable mentions, and you can find this on Spotify at The Indie Pop Girl, and the playlist is called Songs of 2025. I also have the regular favourite tracks from podcast episodes playlist if you fancy dipping into that one on Spotify as well. I'll be back very soon with the introduction to my new series that I'll be teasing on my socials. It's going to be a nice balance to my previous series before Christmas, The Pop Girls, and I'm so excited to talk about the records I have chosen. Until then, I'm Rachel, the Indie Pop Girl. Thanks for listening. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.